All right, good morning everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar today about ERA's Best Challenge. We're broadcasting live from ERA headquarters in beautiful Edmonton, Alberta. My name is Mark Summers. I'm the Executive Director of Technology and Innovation for Emissions Reduction Alberta, or ERA, and I'm joined in the studio today by ERA's CEO, Steve MacDonald.
Good morning, everyone.
Steve and I will be passing the microphone back and forth during the presentation, and we'll both be available to answer questions during the live Q&A period at the end of this session. Before we get into today's agenda, I'll start by going through a few housekeeping items to make sure we get the most out of our time. First of all, we're expecting as many as 500 participants today, so microphones are muted to avoid unintentional background noise. If you've dialed in by phone, please select the telephone option in the audio panel. If you encounter technical challenges related to the webinar connection, please email Amanda at info@eralberta.ca and we'll try to help where possible. And as a final note, if you need to leave early or if you can't see the slides for whatever reason, we will be posting the webinar on ERA's website, which will include the presentation and the live Q&A with a full recording of the audio. We plan to cover a few things on today's webinar. First, Steve will open with an overview of ERA and our mandate. Next, I'll provide an overview of the Best Challenge launched on July 18, including the scope and eligibility for the call, the submission process, and the timelines around ERA's funding process. Then we'll provide some advice for anyone that's interested in making a submission. Steve and I will cover a few frequently asked questions, and we'll spend the remaining time answering your questions. So if you have any questions you'd like us to address, please type them into the questions pane of the GoToWebinar control panel. We'll answer as many questions as we can, but if we don't address your specific question, you're most welcome to follow up with us afterward. Now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our CEO, Steve MacDonald, who will get us started by telling you a little bit about ERA.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you everyone for joining us on the call today. We are so pleased with all the interest that has been shown following Minister Shannon Phillips' announcement of the ERA Best Challenge. ERA is a key partner helping to advance the goals of Alberta's Climate Leadership Plan. Our mandate is to identify and accelerate the development of innovative solutions that reduce GHGs and secure Alberta's success in a low-carbon economy. Put simply, we work with industry, government, and the whole innovation community to find solutions that cut costs and cut carbon. Our investments help industry and communities adapt to and benefit from rapid technological change while positioning Alberta as a jurisdiction where clean technology can succeed. We invest in a range of technologies, from those that deliver near-term emission reductions to those game changers that have the potential to fundamentally change how industry in Alberta performs in the long term. Key for us is to see a pathway to successful commercialization and deployment of the technologies we support. So there must be a clear market need for the technology being developed. For those of you who want to know about where the money we invest comes from, the province of Alberta provides grants to ERA so we can fulfill our mandate. The grants come from compliance payments made under large final emitters under Alberta's carbon competitiveness incentive regulation. Our funding is leveraged as successful projects must match ERA support with private and industry funds. We also work closely with industry and trusted partners such as Sustainable Development Technology Canada, NRCan, Alberta Innovates, post-secondary institutions, and a range of others. Because we know strong partnerships are key to achieving success. Through these partnerships, we can help put in place complete solutions. This includes access to financing, strong policy, regulation, and business model supports. We also know that investing in technologies delivers both economic and environmental benefits. Since ERA's inception in 2009, we have committed $385 million to support 129 projects valued at over $2.6 billion. And we are on track to deliver cumulative GHG reductions of 28 megatons by 2030. These investments will also lead to the creation of thousands of person-year jobs and contribute almost $2 billion to Alberta's GDP. We believe ERA truly is taking a leadership role in advancing solutions to help Alberta's industry become more sustainable and economically competitive. So where do we see the market opportunities for investment? In our 2017 stakeholder research, we learned that a significant part of our audience believes ERA is focused solely on oil and gas technologies. While this is a priority area for us, ERA is also focused beyond hydrocarbons. In fact, we have 4 priority areas. We do want to reduce the carbon footprint of fossil fuels and reduce methane emissions. But we are also looking for technologies to reduce the carbon footprint of Alberta's electricity supply mix and add more non-emitting capacity to meet overall energy demand. Third, we are looking at innovations focused on biological resources to help support overall energy system transformation. This includes areas such as biofuels, bioproducts, and carbon retention opportunities. Finally, we want to support the development of industrial scale conservation and energy efficiency technologies that deliver maximum GHG reductions and reduce costs. For more details on these priority areas, I encourage everyone to go on our website to read our technology roadmap. We worked with government, industry, and innovators on its development to guide our investments decisions and inform our portfolio mix. It will also provide you with a deeper understanding of the pathways we believe will help Alberta become a global hub for technology and innovation in a low-carbon world. ERA's best challenge is a good example of our efforts to take an integrated approach to encourage greater collaboration and technology disruption across the sectors that are reflected in our 4 priority areas. Our primary method to identify investment opportunities is a call for proposals process, like the best challenge. We also have a partnership intake program. This program is an avenue for considering emergent investment opportunities. So when you provide ERA with your funding submission, you have the opportunity to have your submission shared and considered by other funding organizations such as Alberta Innovates, NRCan, and SDTC. We are working together with a number of trusted partners to maximize our capacity, leverage funding, and make it easier for you to navigate Alberta's innovation system. On that topic, if you missed our Maximizing Funding Efficiency workshop in Calgary on June 19th, check out the videos from that event on our website. You can learn more about funding from SDTC, EDC, BDC, NRCan, ATB, the Clean Hope Growth Hub, Alberta Innovates, and, well, pretty much the whole alphabet. I hope I have provided everyone with a better sense of who we are and the outcomes we are trying to achieve. This is a really exciting time to be part of Alberta's innovation community, and no better time to find ways to leverage investments in clean technology and advance the solutions Alberta, Canada, and the world need. We're really looking forward to your questions today and to learning more about the ideas you have to deliver the GHG emission reductions and economic opportunities we all need. With that, I'm going to hand it back to my colleague Mark, who will get into the details of our best challenge.
All right, thanks, Steve. And let me start by saying that this call for proposals is focused on challenging innovators to bring their best technology ideas forward in the areas of bio, electricity, and sustainable transportation. To prepare for the best challenge, we sought input from industry, innovators, governments, and other key stakeholders. What we heard in part was that working within and across these areas will help break down barriers and accelerate the most promising solutions. Alberta's electricity, transportation, and biological industries already have a significant impact on our economy and account for about 40% of the province's annual greenhouse gas emissions. Around the world, there are efforts to accelerate sustainable innovations. Europe, for example, has been a leader in supporting biofuels and bioproducts, while California is gaining recognition as a hub for advanced transportation technologies. We have an opportunity to build on local and international momentum by developing homegrown solutions and bringing the best ideas from around the world to be advanced in Alberta. So with the best challenge, we are making up to $70 million available through a competitive funding opportunity. And this $70 million is available to fund projects that advance innovative technology toward commercialization in the areas of bio, electricity, and sustainable transportation. And let me take a moment to emphasize that we fund projects with clear objectives, milestones, deliverables, and timelines. We don't fund ongoing operations or open-ended programs, like a 5-year research program, for example. So we're looking for innovations that demonstrate significant potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and facilitate Alberta's success in a lower carbon economy. And we welcome opportunities in any of the areas of bio, electricity, and transportation, as well as in the intersections or overlap between these focus areas. So before I go through some of the example areas, let me be clear that we don't know what the best technologies are to help deliver these goals. If we did, we wouldn't have to put out a call for proposals. But we think there might be some strong opportunities in the following areas based on the discussions we've had with many of you listening in today. This could include brand new electricity generation technologies, or innovations that improve the cost and effectiveness of renewable electricity generation, or lead to a zero emissions electricity grid. There are opportunities for next generation biofuel, bioenergy, biomaterials, and biochemical technology, as well as innovation for agriculture and forestry operations. And finally, there are truly transformative opportunities for various modes of transportation, some of which Alberta is already poised to take leadership on. These could include improving the way that vehicles, rail cars, or aircraft are brought from point A to point B, or even finding completely different ways to get from A to B. Now, of course, there are some eligibility considerations to keep in mind. First, as Steve already alluded to, our focus is on later stage opportunities, where the technology has been proven in concept or in the lab or through a prototype and is ready to be scaled up, field piloted, demonstrated, or commercially implemented on a first of kind basis. And so it is for this challenge. We're inviting projects that'll reach the stage of field pilot, demonstration, or first of kind implementation by the end of the project. Next, we know that good ideas and good technology can come from anywhere. And so applicants and technology providers can be Albertan, can be Canadian, or even internationally based. However, while technology can come from anywhere in the world, projects must be piloted, demonstrated, or implemented here in Alberta. And of course, all projects funded through this call must demonstrate a clear value proposition for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and moving toward a lower carbon economy in Alberta. These innovations can come from tech innovators, from industry, small and medium enterprises, post-secondary institutions, municipalities, not-for-profits, or even individuals. We encourage applicants to form partnerships, collaborate with others, and engage Alberta's post-secondary and research institutions. And finally, please keep in mind that the maximum project length is 3 years for this call for proposals. As I mentioned, we're making $70 million available for ERA's Best Challenge, with up to $10 million per project. As usual, we'll match eligible expenses on a maximum one-to-one basis. So for every dollar we put into a project, we need to see $1 of investment from the applicant and its partners. This can be debt equity, this can be equity, can be cash contributions, but please note that we cannot match other government grant funding. We have a helpful eligible expenses guidelines document on our website if you'd like to read more about what is considered eligible and what is not. We only match funding for costs on a go-forward basis, so any costs incurred before ERA's funding approval will not be considered eligible. And finally, I want to emphasize that this is a competitive process, a highly competitive process, and not all projects will be approved for funding. We have a rigorous selection process and a team of experts who will evaluate the submissions and pick the best opportunities. We typically only have the funds available to approve about 1 in 10 projects, so it's important that applicants make a strong case for why their project is best aligned with this challenge. So I'll run through our submission and evaluation process here, and on the next slide, I'll talk about the timelines of this process. As you can see in the diagram, we have a 2-stage evaluation process followed by execution of the project. In the expression of interest, or EOI stage, applicants are invited to provide an overview of their proposed technology. This is a relatively short document at 10 pages maximum and needs to be submitted using our online system by the September 13th deadline at 5 p.m. Mountain Time. I'll repeat this again later, but we will not extend the deadline and we will not accept late submissions. After all the EOIs have been submitted, they're evaluated by a team of independent experts. We bring together evaluators with subject matter expertise in business and financing, science, engineering, and greenhouse gas quantification. After the evaluation of EOIs, a short list of projects will be invited to submit a full project proposal, which includes more detail about the proposed project itself and the expected outcomes of the project. At the full project proposal or FPP stage, an individual project advisor is assigned to each applicant at the time the invitation is made. This advisor is made available to help guide applicants through the process and to provide feedback, if requested, for the full proposals and the oral presentations while they're under development. After the full proposals have been submitted, they are again evaluated by a team of independent experts. And all full proposal applicants will be invited to offer a face-to-face presentation to the evaluation team. This process culminates with an in-depth review meeting amongst the evaluators, where all projects are discussed in great detail, and a recommendation is subsequently brought forward to our board for consideration. All funding decisions are made by ERA's board of directors. After the funding decisions are made, we enter into a legal agreement with successful applicants that details the terms and obligations of each party as it relates to our contribution and to the completion of the project. ERA's funding is distributed on a milestone by milestone basis, and the progress of each project is monitored and reported on throughout the course of the project. At the end of the project, all recipients are required to produce a final outcomes report, which is ultimately shared publicly for the broader benefit of Alberta. And the final thing to note about our process is that the entire process from front to back is overseen by an independent fairness monitor that reports directly to our board. I believe our fairness monitor is on the line today. Hello, Karen. So this evaluation process happens between now and February of 2019. The deadlines for submissions, again, is September 13 at 5 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time, and that's 5 p.m. sharp. The online system automatically closes functionality at exactly the deadline. And again, please note that we will not be extending the deadline and we will not accept late submissions, so don't be late. Once you've submitted your application, you'll receive an email from the system to confirm your submission has been received. If you do not receive this email, please go back into the system, double check that your submission was properly completed, because you should receive this email. I encourage everyone to submit as early as possible. I can't emphasize this enough. Give yourself enough time to make sure your submission was properly completed, well before 5 p.m. If it's 4:59 p.m. and you encounter an issue, that does not leave enough time for troubleshooting. Shortlisted projects will have until early December to provide a full project proposal, and the oral presentations will be scheduled for January of the new year. Final funding decisions will be made at our February 2019 board meeting, and all FPP applicants will be notified by the first week of March. So the last thing I want to talk to you before we address some frequent questions and take your questions today is some advice on how to prepare a successful submission. First, I recommend to everyone that you start the process now. From now until the submission deadline, there are about 6 weeks. I know that it doesn't take 6 weeks to put together an application. However, it does take time to forge partnerships, get internal approvals and signatures if necessary, and allocate internal resources. And while you don't need to have every internal approval and every partnership finalized by the submission deadline for the expressions of interest, the further along you are in these processes, the better off you are in terms of demonstrating that your project is real and ready to advance. Since all submissions need to be completed through our online portal, please go there, create an account, and get familiar with the system. Next, and I really can't emphasize this enough, is to read the call for expressions of interest, the guidelines document. It's not a long document and it answers most of the questions that we get on a regular basis. If you have a project that's not eligible or doesn't fit with this call, you can save yourself a lot of time by reading the guidelines document and figuring that out early. Well, this next point is really an extension of the last one, and that is to review the evaluation criteria, which are provided in the guidelines document. These are the criteria upon which each proposal is evaluated and ultimately shortlisted. And each of these criteria have different weightings. While they're all important and they all need to be addressed, I would encourage you to consider the relative weighting of each of the criteria when completing your application. Okay, now building on that point, When you're completing the expression of interest document, it's important to use clear language and to address the points laid out in the template. Our evaluation team consists of subject matter experts, but if they can't decipher the information that's necessary to make a qualified assessment, or if the 10-page document is filled with extraneous information, they won't have the confidence to move the application forward in the process. Speaking of the 10-page limit, it's also worth noting that you're welcome to include optional letters of support. These letters of support do not count toward the 10-page limit and can be quite beneficial for your application. And last, but certainly not least, do not wait until the last day to submit your application. I can tell you that we have lost good submissions and good opportunities in the past because deadlines were missed. This is a matter of fairness to all applicants and something we are firm on. If you do have technical issues during the submission process, our IMS team is happy to help resolve technical issues, and we try to be responsive to the requests that come in. However, if you wait until the last day, it's entirely possible that we can't address all of the last-minute issues that come up. And before we move on to questions, I want to take a minute to talk about leveraging funding from our trusted partners. As Steve mentioned, ERA works in partnership with other funding organizations like Alberta Innovates, SDTC, and Natural Resources Canada. In some cases, there may be an opportunity for ERA to share your proposal with our trusted partners and explore the possibility to leverage funding that's available from these organizations. During the submission process in the IMS, you will have the opportunity to allow us to share your submissions with our trusted partners, and I encourage you to do so, but you don't need to. If you agree to this in the system, ERA will only share your application with partners where we have a non-disclosure agreement in place and for the sole purpose of exploring further funding leverage. Okay, I know we have some questions coming in from participants, which is great, but I thought we'd start by addressing a few of our most frequently asked questions to get these out of the way with. The answer to these questions, as well as some other frequently asked questions, can also be found on our website. All right, so first off, the question is, does a project need to be specific to one of the focus areas? And the answer is that significant opportunities exist in each of the areas and at the intersections between the areas. ERA is inviting proposals that involve one or more or all of these focus areas. We anticipate selecting a diverse portfolio of opportunities across these areas.
We are often asked if I've already received funding from ERA, can I still apply? And the short answer is yes. However, please note that projects that have received funding or funding approval from ERA are not eligible to receive further ERA funding for the same project. Past recipients are welcome to apply for new projects, different technologies, or for follow-on projects.
All right, thanks, Steve. Next up, question that we often get is, does the applicant need to be incorporated in Alberta? And do all project partners need to be from Alberta? The short answer is no. The applicant, the technology, and the consortium partners can come from anywhere. However, please keep in mind the project must be piloted, demonstrated, or implemented in Alberta. And furthermore, all projects must demonstrate a clear and justified value proposition for greenhouse gas and economic benefits to the province of Alberta.
Another question we get is, can someone submit multiple applications? And again, the short answer is yes. There is no limit on the number of applications from any one party. However, we encourage applicants to present only their highest quality applications. This is a highly competitive process, and we look for projects with the greatest potential for success. So this isn't about quantity, this really is about quality.
Excellent. Next up, if a project is accepted, does the intellectual property become public? The quick answer is no. Under normal circumstances, all intellectual property remains with the original owner, according to the intellectual property arrangement that the applicant has with all of its partners. ERA does require public reporting of the project outcomes and learnings, but business and competitive confidentiality is maintained.
So if an application is shared with a trusted partner who decides to also fund the project, will the funding be in addition to ERA's funding? And generally, the funding from ERA's trusted partner will be in addition to the amount awarded by ERA. However, there could be situations where trusted partners funding is used to offset a portion of the funding request to ERA. For example, if ERA is unable to fund the entire amount requested. The key point I want to make here is that ERA funding must be matched with private investment. We use the fact that the private sector has stepped up to fund this project as one of our indicators that there's a market pull and a sharing of a risk around the project. And so that's a critical piece for us.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. That's really important. And building on that point, and I know it's not on the slide here, but an additional question we often get is, if you choose not to share your proposal with our trusted partners, does it affect your chances in ERA's best challenge? And the quick answer is no. We're not going to screen any applications out or make our decisions based on whether you're willing to share your application or not. So if you're not comfortable doing so, you're welcome not to. However, as we've already stated, this is only for your benefit, and it's only for the opportunity to seek additional funding for your project. All right, so if you've made it this far, and if you're still awake, this is your opportunity to ask questions related to the best challenge. Please type your questions into the questions pane of the control panel, which is typically on the right-hand side of your screen. And while you do that, I'm going to turn the time over to my colleague Elizabeth Shirt, ERA's Executive Director of Policy and Strategy, who is sifting through the questions now as they come in, and will read some questions out loud for the three of us to address.
Thanks, Steve and Mark. Great presentation. So the first question comes from Garrett Duffy. He wonders, how does sustainable transportation fit within our 4 focus areas? And perhaps I'd start by suggesting you do visit our website and check out our technology roadmap. But Mark and Steve, do you want to take a crack at elaborating on that?
Go ahead, Mark.
Sure. I think it's a really good question, and the sustainable transportation opportunities are something that's fairly new to our portfolio. We've made some investments in the past, but we think it's an opportunity that we can get into more in a meaningful way and make some significant investments. I would say if you look at the 4 areas that we have around fossil fuels, around electricity, around biological resource optimization, and around industrial process efficiency, transportation can really fit into any of those opportunities. So when we talk about reducing the greenhouse gas footprint of fossil fuels and fossil fuel supply, you can look at transportation opportunities from a fuel switching perspective and look at innovative, novel approaches for reducing the greenhouse gas impact of fossil fuels that are used for transportation. Similarly, from an electricity perspective, moving our electricity system to a low emitting supply or a low emitting electricity system allows for opportunities for novel electrification opportunities in the transportation and other spaces as well. In the biological resource optimization space, if you think about biofuels or even other bio opportunities, that can fit in with transportation, of course, as well. And of course, in sustainable transportation, as well as just about any industrial sector or otherwise, across the province of Alberta, there are opportunities to improve efficiency, increase the carbon productivity, and reduce the consumption of fuels, as well as the production of greenhouse gas emissions.
And I'd just add on this for everybody listening out there. We're excited about this challenge because it is an opportunity to reinforce that solutions in one sector are often applicable to other sectors. And Mark's, discussed the idea of battery technology. That's an issue for sustaining the renewable part of our grids. It's a transportation issue. It has a whole bunch of applications. So as you're thinking about your ideas, those solutions that have a broader application across the economy are areas we're going to be very interested in exploring.
Great, thanks for those responses. Maybe I'll just take a minute and let folks on the call know we won't be answering questions about eligibility for specific technologies or projects at this time. We will be answering more broad questions that apply across the call, but please do follow up with us after the webinar, and we'll be happy to try to help answer specific questions about eligibility of your technologies. So we've had a few folks asking about first in kind. So our guidelines, and also in your presentation, we talked about funding pilots, demonstrations, and first of a kind deployments in Alberta. So what does that mean? And one example might be geothermal, which we know has perhaps been deployed elsewhere, but not necessarily in Alberta.
So what people need to remember is we are in the business of de-risking technology. So that first of kind criteria is really about, it's a technology that hasn't been proven in the environment, in the Alberta context. So that's what we're looking for. So if it's a technology that's been deployed in another jurisdiction, but hasn't been deployed in Alberta, we're interested in that. But we're not interested in technology that's business as usual in some way, or is relatively well known in Alberta, and what you're really looking is for a financial subsidy. So that first of kind is to allow us to meet our mandate of de-risking technology, novel technology, and advancing that toward commercialization and deployment. Mark, do you want to add?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I'll add to that quite quickly and just say, we're always happy to have a conversation. You know, it's not always black and white. Sometimes first of kind can represent different things. It can represent a technology that's been demonstrated elsewhere, and this is the first time it's been demonstrated in Alberta under our climate conditions or whatever the case may be. Other cases, it's a brand new innovative technology that's been scaled up here in Alberta, hasn't been done elsewhere, but needs to be implemented at the commercial scale for the first time ever. So again, if you have any questions, we're always happy to have a conversation. Send an email to us at applications@eralberta.ca, and one of us will be happy to have a conversation with you.
Great, thanks both. So obviously GHG reductions are an important objective or criteria for our funding. So we have a question about methodologies for quantifying greenhouse gas emissions reductions. Mark, could you speak to how applicants can address that?
Sure, that's a fairly broad question. I'll offer a couple thoughts, and hopefully they're helpful and along the lines of what the question is getting at. So maybe I'll take a step back and say, at the highest level, we align our greenhouse gas quantification principles and methodology where possible with the Alberta government. We are part of Alberta's climate change system and therefore need to be aligned. So we have a methodology document that's available on our website. It's helpful, and again, if you have any specific questions, you're more than welcome to reach out. At the expression of interest stage, please keep in mind, of course, that we're not looking for lots of detail around the greenhouse gas quantification. We're looking for preliminary quantification, we're looking for a sense, and we're looking for whether or not this is a significant opportunity to bring Alberta to a lower carbon economy and a lower carbon future. And for those applications that are shortlisted to the full project proposal stage, we require a more detailed quantification methodology document. And there are some guidelines that will be provided in the full project proposal guidelines documentation and the invitation that is sent out. In addition, we have an in-house greenhouse gas quantification expert that is available for one-on-one conversations with applicants at the full project proposal stage. If you have any really tough questions around quantification that you're struggling with right now, again, I would invite you to reach out. We can try and answer those questions directly amongst those of us in the room here today, as well as reach out to our greenhouse gas quantification expert if there are any tough questions.
Great, thanks, Mark. We have a couple of questions about project duration and what does it mean that a project has to be complete within 3 years? Is there any flexibility around that length of time? Could you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, maybe I'll start by saying, our goal is to, once we select a project, to do everything reasonable to ensure we have a successful outcome, that the objectives set at the beginning of the project are achieved, the technology is advanced and ultimately deployed in Alberta has some economic and environmental benefits. So I'll start off with that. But you have to start off with some sense and some guidelines and some expectations. And so that 3-year timeline is what we'd like to see, because there is a sense of urgency around our projects. We need to demonstrate results in the medium term. And so that's where we start. However, we recognize that this is innovation, that this is new technology, that unexpected events can occur from equipment failure, from financing issues, from regulatory barriers. So we're always open to considering reasonable extensions of that. But you should submit a project that has a clear start and end date that fits within the guidelines. Because again, we want to make sure that we're selecting projects that have all the right pieces in place at the beginning, that we're all reasonable in terms of the expected outcomes, and we're driving toward those in terms of the milestones we're going to achieve and the outcomes we're going to achieve. So, Mark, do you want to add?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I'll add to that a little bit and say that I'll dive a little bit deeper into the weeds and say from a sort of a technicality perspective, that 3 years is from the project start date that is outlined in our contribution agreement. And that date is always after the date of our funding approval. So it's not 3 years from today or 3 years from the time that you submit your application. Ultimately, for the applicants that are successful in our process, we enter into a contribution agreement, and development of that contribution agreement takes a little bit of time. And in that process, we decide what is the start date of the project and what is the end date of that project. And that's the 3-year window that we're talking about. And of course, we want to hold your feet to the fire as we carry out the project, as we report on milestone progress, and we want to ensure that these deliverables are met, that the objectives of the project are met, and that they're done so within that time frame. However, as Steve mentioned, as we get to the project, toward the end of the project, we know that this is innovation. We know sometimes things happen, and if we get closer to the end of the project and we realize that we need a few extra weeks, a couple extra months, or a little bit of an extension to that time frame, we can be flexible in that regard. And as you carry out your project, a point that I didn't mention is that throughout the course of your project, you'll also be assigned a project advisor or a primary point of contact within ERA. And so as the project carries out, we expect you to be remaining in contact with your project advisor. And if you know that things might at the end take a little bit longer than the 3-year period, we hope that you can communicate that with your project advisor sooner rather than later.
Great, thank you. You talked a little bit about the requirement for one-to-one matching and the ability to also have other government dollars in the mix. We have a few questions though, just to clarify what is allowed in terms of having funding from other perhaps provincial or federal funding agencies, and how does the one-to-one matching apply to organizations like municipalities or post-secondaries who sometimes receive grant funding?
So I'll start off at the high level where I fly best. And again, back to my earlier response around that question we get often is, we need to see that the private sector has validated the opportunity in some way and is prepared to step up with risk capital in some way. So that one-to-one matching is very important to our board. It's a validation that people have done their due diligence, that they've talked to customers, that they've talked to the marketplace, and the marketplace says there's value here and we're prepared to go along for the ride. Organizations that receive other government funding sources, again, we're prepared to look at that, but that private sector dollars at the table is absolutely essential for us. And Mark, please add.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And again, maybe I'll get a little bit more technical here. And so first off, I guess our requirement is that for every dollar we put into the project, we want to see $1 or more of that private investment. And that's kind of it. It's fairly simple. And what that means is, in theory, we don't have a stacking limit. And in fact, we're encouraging you to allow us to share your application with our trusted partners. And part of that is so that we can leverage other dollars that are available. whether it's federal dollars or other provincial dollars or whatever the case may be. So we're happy to fund alongside our provincial and federal funding partners. It's not uncommon that we fund projects that are also funded by NRCan or SDTC, for example, but we cannot match those dollars. We have to match the dollars that are provided from the applicant. So in theory, we've seen it before, we could have a project that is funded 1/3 by ERA, 1/3 by SDTC or NRCan, and 1/3 from the recipient or the applicant, where our dollars are being matched on a one-to-one basis by those private investment dollars. And then I think the next part of your question, Elizabeth, that I want to touch on is around municipalities and research organizations such as universities and other entities that sometimes get funding from the provincial or federal government, for that matter. And so we don't want to rule out good opportunities from these types of organizations. And we want to be able to work with municipalities, and we have worked with municipalities and post-secondary research organizations. And so we want to continue to do that. And so it's a little bit technical, but essentially, if a municipality or a research organization has received a grant from a government through a granting program like SDTC or NRCan or whatever the case may be for a specific project, we will not match those dollars. However, we are able to and will consider matching dollars from the general revenue of the municipality or of that research organization, even though some of those revenue dollars, general revenue, or some of the dollars coming into the budget for the organization may have been from government sources. So I hope that helps kind of clarify the situation.
Great, thank you so much. A couple of questions about projects and where the technology can originate, whether it has to come from a company based in Alberta. Could you talk more about the requirements around that, Steve and Mark?
Sure. So as Mark said earlier, we know that good ideas come from anywhere in the world, and the pool and pond in Alberta may not be as deep as we need for all the best ideas. So we welcome ideas to come from other jurisdictions, either from other provinces within Canada or from outside Canada. So the source of the idea isn't of concern to us, but the idea itself has to be deployed in Alberta. Because again, this is funding that comes from Alberta's industries. It's designed to help them be successful in a low carbon world. So we need to be able to demonstrate that technology here in Alberta and be able to point to the value proposition for emission reductions in Alberta and economic benefits in Alberta. So again, it's not, we're not concerned about where the good idea comes from, but where we need to see it demonstrated and deployed is in Alberta. Do you need to open an office in Alberta? That would be a business decision by the proponent. We often see that because if there's a significant project going in within a province, you usually want your people on the ground to help manage it and be involved in that way. And ideally, if we're successful, and again, if we're de-risking the technology and turning those ideas into products and ultimately products into companies, we would hope that this creates the advantage for the proponent to consider Alberta as the place to actually commercialize and deploy that technology within the province, within the country, and internationally.
Thanks, Steve. I'll add to that a little bit and just reiterate the notion again that the ideas and the companies can be from anywhere, but when it comes to steel in the ground or cattle in the field or lumber in the mill, we want those things to be happening in the province of Alberta. And so we could have a non-Albertan company that brings a non-Albertan technology into the province and puts it in the field for a pilot or a demonstration or a first-of-kind commercial implementation. And do you need to have a partner that's based in Alberta? No, it's not a strict requirement, but I would encourage you, depending on the nature of the project, oftentimes having a local partner can be beneficial. And I'm not speaking necessarily from ERA's application process, but just from a business standpoint, to get an understanding of the local market, to have a partner that can help facilitate the pathway toward commercialization, that can often be beneficial.
I'm just going to build on that last point that Mark made. And again, talk about that this is a very, very competitive process. So out of the 100+ applicants we get, you're trying to distinguish yourself as the best choice for us to make a significant investment. And so if you're coming from another jurisdiction and you can't demonstrate you have a market demand here, you can't demonstrate an understanding of the business environment, you can't demonstrate that you've talked to industry here and they say this is a great idea and it needs support, you're at a significant disadvantage, because our accountability is to Alberta and to Albertans. And if you can demonstrate you understand that, you've done your homework, you've created the potential for strong environmental and economic benefits for Alberta, you're going to rise up the list in terms of meeting the criteria around that. So I really want to emphasize the competitive nature of this, and the more you can demonstrate that the partners are in place, the understanding of the issues in Alberta are in place, and the value proposition for Alberta is clearly articulated, the better your opportunity to be successful and be advanced in terms of being invited to a full project proposal stage.
Great, thank you guys. We talked a little bit about the agent stage of technologies that we're looking for with the best challenge. Could you talk a little bit about, in terms of technology readiness levels, would there be a minimum TRL to sort of come in? Does it have to be, does the project need to be at that TRL when it begins or when it ends? And then as a bit of a follow-on, talk a bit about sort of how we're again defining innovation in that sense, and would we weight more heavily towards very innovative versus more what some are calling incremental kinds of technologies?
Sure, maybe I'll suggest that I'll try and tackle the first part of that question, and maybe I'll allow Steve to offer his thoughts on the follow-on or the second part of that question. So around the TRL, you'll probably notice in our guidelines document that we avoided using the specific phraseology around technology readiness level. This was somewhat intentional, and that's because we know that for non-engineering projects, particularly those in some of the biospaces, in the agriculture space, the forestry space, TRL is a little bit of, I don't want to say a foreign concept, but it just doesn't work super well, and we understand that. Now, since the question is a little bit about TRL, I'll start talking some technology readiness level numbers, and hopefully it's helpful for those that think a little bit more in those terms. So what we've said is that we want projects at the field pilot, demonstration, and first of kind commercial implementation stage. And ultimately what that means is that by the end of the project, by the end of the 3-year period, we want the projects to be essentially at TRL 7, 8, and 9. And there's, everybody's definition of TRL is a little bit different, and so there's some gray area between TRL 6 and TRL 7 sometimes, but more or less at the end of the project, we want it to be TRL 7, 8, or 9. At the start of the project, does it matter? We don't have an absolute minimum, but I can say if you come to us with a technology that's at TRL 2 or maybe even TRL 3 and say, gosh, we've got this concept that's being investigated in the lab right now, and by the end of the 3-year period, we think we can bring it to TRL 7 or 8 or even 9. That may or may not be realistic, and that's part of the evaluation process, part of the realism that we cast judgment on or evaluate or assess the risk of, and whether or not you can ultimately bring technologies to the 7, 8, or 9 by the end of the project. Because that's an important principle. If you say that by the end of the 3-year period, you're going to have an operational field pilot or field test, whether it's a technology or cattle or forestry or whatever the case may be, in the field operational, that's what's going to be in the contribution agreement, and that's what the money that we provide to you is going to be based on. So we'd encourage you not to be unrealistic. Don't think that you can take something from TRL 2 or 3 to TRL 7 in a 3-year period, because it may not very well be realistic. There may be some situations where it is realistic to jump over 1 or 2 technology readiness levels in a 3-year period, but it has to be realistic, and that's part of the assessment that we make. Now, I forget the second part of your question, Elizabeth. I wonder if you could repeat that, and maybe Steve remembers, maybe he can address it.
I'm much younger than Mark, so my memory's much stronger, so I'll try to answer that piece. Where I was going to go on that is, we're just one piece of a very complicated ecosystem out there. And there's, as many of you out there know, there's been lots of announcements around funding, different organizations stepping up to the plate with investments. So when you think about our ability to share with trusted partners, it's not just we're handing off the project saying, we're going to fund this, are you interested? Part of that is we can look at a project and say, you know what, this is a better fit with someone who's more experienced and more focused on earlier stage. And I think of our partner organization like Alberta Innovates. So we, as Mark said, we may see a project, say, hey, wow, this is really cool stuff. We don't think it's going to get as far as we need it to go. But we can, when we share it with Alberta Innovates, say, these guys are sort of in the R&D earlier stages. Would you be interested in supporting this? So 2 advantages. That one is you get the opportunity for them to consider that. And then you've set up the expectation that if this project does advance, we know who you are, the possibilities of your technologies. So in a way, you can fast track onto the next level of funding if in fact your project progresses as expected. The other thing is our trusted partners include our post-secondary institutions like the U of A, U of C, NAIT, SAIT. And so some of that early stage stuff, again, we can identify that this is a cool project, probably better fit with your mandates, and create those relationships and opportunities so there's a bit of a seamless handoff between our organizations. So the point being is, we're a door in, but we're not going to kick you out because it doesn't fit. If we think it's a good idea, we'll build on our trusted partner relationships to help you find the right place to have a longer conversation with someone who might be better positioned to deal with your ask at the age and stage that your organization and technology is at.
Great, thank you both. We have a few questions about opportunities for First Nations to become involved, whether that be as a partner, as a project proponent, and what that looks like in terms of funding that they might bring to the table. Steve, is that something that you might want to talk about?
Sure. Well, thanks, Elizabeth. That's a great question, because we're looking at innovation, and the innovation is around the technology, but also the business models. And in terms of the potential for commercialization, exploring new markets, and those economic benefits. So opportunities with First Nations are absolutely desirable for us, of interest to us. The framing of the questions around partnerships, deployment, site, the government's done a lot of work with rural or remote communities. So this is a long-winded answer to yes. Strategic partnerships that we don't traditionally see that allow us to deploy technologies in a novel way are of interest to us, and the First Nations is a great example.
Great, thank you. Mark, are in-kind contributions, would that count as matching funds?
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. This is a question that we actually get quite often, and maybe we ought to put it on our frequently asked questions list next time around. I think we'll probably try to do that. So we don't often use the exact phrase in-kind contributions or in-kind, simply because different organizations have somewhat different definitions of what in-kind means. And so we try to address this in our eligible expenses guidelines document. So again, I would encourage everybody to go take a look at it. It's also not really long, and if you want, we provide a couple clarifying paragraphs around eligible in-kind contributions. So for us, the principle is more that for an eligible contribution is a go forward or an incremental cost for the project. So we won't match costs that have been sunk previous to the period of the project. So it has to be go forward costs only. And now sometimes what folks might talk about as an in-kind contribution is staff time from one of the partner organizations. Well, for us, if there is a cost, a cash outlay, or salary paid to an employee, whether it's from the recipient organization or a partner organization, if there's a cash outlay or a cost, we can consider that an eligible contribution. So there are some in-kind contributions that people often talk about that are eligible. Of course, there are some that are not. And the biggest piece of advice I can give you is to take a look at our cost guidelines document, which provides more clarity.
Perfect, thanks, Mark. A bit of a follow-on, when does matching funding need to be in place in terms of our application process?
Sure, I'll jump in on that one as well. Thanks, Elizabeth. So this is much like some of the other requirements that we have, where the earlier on in the process you can show that you either have confirmed matching funding or a pathway to get confirmed matching funding, the greater the confidence that you can put in our team that there's a lower financial risk or risk of the project not happening from a funding standpoint. Now, from a technicality perspective, for all projects that are approved for funding by our board of directors, they're always approved conditional upon confirmation of secured financing from the recipient or its partners or whatever funding sources need to be in place. And we provide a deadline, and I think that deadline described in the guidelines document is 3 months or something along that order. So after funding has been approved, you'll receive a letter from us that indicates the timelines associated with requiring funding approval. And so we do provide a short amount of time after funding has been approved in order for financing to be confirmed. But again, and I'll reiterate, the further along you are in that process and the clearer the pathway you can describe toward receiving that funding in the proposal, the greater the confidence we'll have during our assessment.
And I'd add, we also understand clearly that it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation for many companies, is that they can't raise funding without government funding, and we won't give you our funding without private sector funding. So that's what that 3-month window really does allow you. So as Mark said, you should have your financing conversations well underway, but we also understand that often if we can step up and say, you know, for every dollar you get privately, there's a dollar of government money, that may release that other funding. So we appreciate that, and we work closely with our successful proponents to ensure that the financing can be put in place, and we try to accommodate that as best we can in terms of assurance that our funding will be there if that private money is there. So we appreciate that, but you need to be, it's tough to start to go to the market after we've approved our money and try to generate those that risk capital. You should have your homework done, and then our money can become a trigger to secure that private money.
Perfect. So we are approaching 11 a.m. I'd like to suggest perhaps this might be the last question we would take over the webinar, but please do reach out to us if your questions weren't answered, and we'll do our very best to help you work through the process. Steve, I thought this was an interesting question. I'm going to direct it towards you to begin. What if my innovation is not successful, my project?
Well, we get that there's technology risk here, that if everything was certain, there would be no need for our money, the public dollars and the risk that we help assume just wouldn't be necessary. So we understand that the project may not deliver exactly as originally envisioned, but we learn from that. And as Mark mentioned in his opening comments, there's a report that we released saying that here's what we thought this technology could do, but as we scaled up and went from 1 barrel per day to 10,000, the catalyst didn't work. There wasn't the reliability we needed. But in our mind, that's advancing the technology. That's showing that this pathway is not successful, but there's always some learning from that. And as we're evaluating the projects, we recognize that. And that's why we try to pick projects where it's a concept and a principle, a science that we know in theory works well, that someone's demonstrated at the lower levels, and we're trying to scale that up to so there's a proof and ability to deploy it. So we don't call them failures, we call them learnings. But at the front end, again, we're trying to ensure that we're able to advance the technology by the project itself in some way. Mark, do you want to talk about that?
We're just about out of time, and so I will agree with Steve, and I won't add any more thoughts. All right, well, that brings us to the end of this webinar. We're out of time, unfortunately. Thank you very much for your interest and your really good questions and your participation today. As we already talked about, if you have unanswered questions after the webinar and after reviewing our supporting materials, please feel free to email us. You can see the email address here on the screen. That's applications@eralberta.ca, and we'll also add it to our website. Finally, we hope to have the webinar posted on our website by the end of this week or early next week. So thank you once again, everyone, and please enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.